Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder. Today I want to review the USS Sumner DD-692 and this currently end-of-the-line destroyer and top dog for the Americans is considered to be one of, if not the best destroyer in the game. But just to drive out and to actually gun down everything is not its speciality. And that has to do with some of its advantages that bring some disadvantages with them as well. So I want to compare the ship with its main rivals to point out its strengths and weaknesses, how to use the strength, how to actually avoid the weaknesses, and also how to fight against it. And also I want to introduce you to Drachinifel, which will tell us in a 5-minute episode or 5-minute guide about the historical career of those ships. So let's begin with that.
The Alan M. Sumner class would consist of 58 gun destroyers built by the United States during World War II, with 12 additional hulls built as destroyer mine layers of the Robert H. Smith subclass. Their defining characteristic above all else was the introduction of the twin 5-inch 38 caliber gun mount to US destroyers, after having had that mount deployed to pretty much every modern or modernized US cruiser and battleship currently in commission. They displaced slightly more than their direct predecessors, the Fletcher class, but by concentrating the main battery in 3 twin mounts instead of 5 singles, they were able to carry an extra main gun, but at the same time actually offer more deck space for other weapons, and were thus able to offer a similar anti-aircraft battery to a Fletcher fully decked out in anti-kamikaze array without losing a torpedo launcher and still maintaining a heavier main broadside, amongst other minor noticeable advancements. The first ship would be laid down in 1943 and the last in 1944, with the run actually being curtailed to allow for construction of the much more numerous Gearing class, which were basically stretched versions of this ship with more fuel added for longer range. The ships were built incredibly quickly, with most of them taking 5 to 6 months from keel laying to launch, and commissioning within a couple of months of the latter event. They were usually in active service less than a year after the first steel was laid down. Modern fire control and radar guidance systems were installed for the main dual-purpose battery that was already mentioned to consist of 6 5-inch 38 caliber guns in twin mounts, 2 superfiring forward and 1 aft, along with the extensive AA battery of 12 40mm Bofors in 2 quad and 2 twin mounts, and 11 20mm Oerlikons. 2 quintuple torpedo tubes came with the ships, as well as depth charge rails and half a dozen depth charge launchers. As with the Fletchers, though, the lack of Imperial Japanese Navy surface units in combat condition and the increase in kamikaze air attack toward the end of the war would see a number of ships lose the rear torpedo launcher in exchange for another quad 40mm mount, for a total of 16 of these Bofors weapons. The ship as a whole was marginally larger than its predecessor, with just over a foot more beam and draft, leading to around 150 tons more displacement, with the 60,000 shaft horsepower engines driving 2 screws to a top speed of around 34 knots, making them slightly slower than their immediate predecessors. With their extensive battery of anti-aircraft firepower and modern fire control systems, they often served on semi-detached duty as radar pickets to provide early warning of incoming air attacks and try to disrupt them, since the kind of airborne early warning aircraft we see today had not yet been perfected. Their main starring role was during the Battle of Okinawa, where they would give advanced warning of wave after wave of Japanese air attacks. Mainly serving in this role, 4 would be lost, 2 to air attack, 1 to torpedo attack from an enemy destroyer, and 1 hitting a mine, with 1 further ship being written off due to damage from enemy action. A final loss was the unlucky USS Frank E. Evans, which got run over by an Australian aircraft carrier and cut in 2. Needless to say, it was not repaired. After the war, the light anti-aircraft battery would be replaced with a number of 3-inch 50 caliber guns, as the expected engagement range against aircraft had increased, and the need for a heavier gun that could shoot further was identified. A heavier tripod mast was also needed to mount the much more powerful radar that had been developed. The old depth charge rails were also becoming less useful, and ahead-throwing Hedgehog launchers were added instead. About half the surviving class would then be converted in the 1960s to a further upgrade which replaced the existing torpedo launchers and all the guns, except for the 5-inch weapons, with newer torpedo tubes that covered a variety of light and heavyweight homing torpedoes designed primarily for anti-submarine use. New sonar and a small drone helicopter were also installed. The other half of the class didn't get as extensive upgrades, but would still gain the lightweight homing torpedo tube launchers in exchange for some of their older anti-submarine equipment. A number of these ships would serve as gunfire support alongside the Iowa class in Vietnam, exploiting the commonality of parts between their main and the battleship's secondary batteries to simplify logistics and repairs. However, with missiles becoming more and more dominant and the drone helicopter proving unreliable, the ships were becoming obsolete and were eventually replaced with the Knox-class frigates. 7 of them would be sunk in fleet sink exercises, 13 were scrapped, and 29 were sold on to 10 other countries. USS Hainsworth would last in the Taiwanese Navy until 1999 as the Yuen Yan, while the USS Torsig would reach into the 21st century, only just, in the same navy as the Luiyang, being decommissioned in February 2000. One ship, the USS Laffey, remains as a museum ship in South Carolina. The Luiyang may still become such a ship, and the 2 that were sold to Iran still appear to exist, although as immobile hulks.
Now let's talk about the ship in-game, and one of the decisive differences to a lot of the other destroyers is the armor which this ship actually has, and it's 19mm of so-called anti-fragmentation armor, which is useful in reducing the damage from nearby splashes, from bombs and rockets and HE shells, but also actually giving some protection versus low caliber AP and low caliber HE, especially from autocannons, so you actually have a bit more survivability against a Project 159 or a German Albatros, as well as some of the smaller destroyers. They are doing not that much damage. But this armor protection also comes at a price, since every bomb will arm and every AP shot will arm, especially if you're angled, and that includes also the 13mm of deck armor. Now we also will continue the journey with armor with some of the greatest strength of this ship, which is also one of the biggest weakness, quite literally, and those are the turrets. We have 3 of those double turrets with 127mm 538 Mark 12 dual purpose guns, and as you can see, their armor is just 6.35mm anti-fragmentation armor, as well as the front of the turret not being really that much angled, being a huge target, and so even splash damage can disable them, as well as cannon fire from even aircraft, and even small PT boats can disable them. So you have this amazing firepower, but you also can get robbed of it fairly quickly, as well as it is very prominent in not just one but multiple gameplays, fighting with this ship but also fighting against other Sumner class ships. The disabling of the turrets was much more prominent than on other destroyers. Going to the X-ray, we can see that the ammo racks in the front and a bit more to the middle of the ship, as well as the rather large one in the stern section of the ship, are rather big and prominent and just under the waterline, so getting ammo racked is not uncommon, and taking out huge amounts of your ammunition might make a difference, but I not really noticed it. The middle of the ship is also stuffed with fuel tanks, engines, driving shafts, the usual propellant stuff on a destroyer. One final note about here, the steering gears, they get disabled very often as well, because you have this kind of prominent double rudder. Now let's talk about actual facts, and here we can see that beginning with the guns, we have the highest amount together with the hider of 6, and we have the same arrangement in 3 double turrets, of which 4 are facing forward, which is good. The Hider's ammo rack is also a little bit above the waterline, and the Hider has no armor, so you might expect to survive a few more hits, but don't risk it because the enemy always has the lucky shot. The caliber of those 127mm 538 Mark 12 dual purpose guns is great as well, and we have the highest ammunition capacity of 2160 rounds, which actually dwarfs the amount that the Steroini and the Kalagaster bring with them. Furthermore, the reload with 4.0 seconds on an ace crew is fairly decent. Together with the amount of the guns, we have the highest effective DPM if you use all guns. Then let's talk about the torpedoes. Here I have the facts with the torpedo mode. We have 10 of those Mark 15 533mm torpedoes, and we have them in 2 quintuple launchers. They have actually, with the torpedo mode, the second highest range, just a few hundred meters after the Z20s, but then they are fairly slow with just 49 knots. Or kilometers, sorry about this. And I will talk about this a bit more because it is down to personal taste, I guess, if you use them with or without the torpedo mod. The ship itself has the second highest displacement with 3,218 tons. Again, the Z20 is heavier in this respect, as well as being faster by 8 kilometers. In this respect, the Sumner is in this comparison the slowest destroyer. But therefore we have the highest crew, so in combination with the armor that it has, it actually is one of the best PT boat hunters, especially because also the secondary armament consists of many 40mm, and also we have 2 quadruple 40mm Bofors, which actually decimate not just planes but also here PT boats. So if you are stripped of your main armament, again the turrets are fairly weak and vulnerable, you can switch to the 40mm and just hack down everything. Even smaller destroyers or some of the first destroyers, they can just not withstand that rate of fire and damage output, especially at short range. When we talk about the ammunition for the main guns, we have to look at 3 different ammunition types, and the first one is the stock ammunition, the HE, the 127mm AAC. It is a fairly slow shell with a muzzle velocity of 792 meters per second. That's due to the rather short barrel length of the 5-inch guns, and we have therefore actually a bit more high explosive content in them with 3.22 kilograms of TNT equivalent. That gives us a blast penetration power from the explosion itself of 35 millimeters, but also the kinetic force of the pure speed of the shell gives it at close quarters a penetration power of up to 57 millimeters, but that obviously slows down with distance. The second shell type is the 127mm common APHE. It is also fairly slow with the same muzzle velocity of 792 meters per second, and it has just a penetration power of 146 millimeters, which is very low compared to the PR7 Steroini and also especially the Z20 Kalgalster, and it, especially at longer distances, takes a while up until it reaches the enemy, with a huge tendency to actually produce plunging fire at even lower combat ranges. It is not easy to hit an enemy at range with it, however you have 1.15 kilograms of TNT equivalent in the burst charge. The third and final shell type is a tier 3 consecutive upgrade, and that is the 127mm AAVT proximity fuse. And this is basically the HE shell with a proximity fuse in it, so same muzzle velocity, same burst charge, same penetration values, except that it actually acts as a HE shell with a nose fuse when it hits enemy ships, and also when you shoot at aircraft it then actually gives you this proximity fuse explosion, and together with the 40mm and 20mm guns, this makes the Sumner one of the worst nightmares of aircraft. And that actually tells you then one of your many roles that you can actually fulfill and should fulfill within the battles of War Thunder. This comparison of the shell types shows you that the muzzle velocity is through the bank the worst out of the chosen ships, and the actual trade-off that we have is that we have excellent damage output on those shells. So we have some of the highest bursting charges. Just the PR7 Ustroini has doubled the amount of high explosive containment, but you actually surpass the one of the Z20 and the Haida, and you're obviously equal to the USS Cowell. Furthermore, the HE is very strong, and the amount of proximity fuses that you can send skywards is very intense for enemy aircraft. And that is very effective in not just protecting you, yourself, but also your teammates. Especially, you should focus on protecting the light cruisers that tank damage for you, because despite the armor that you have and despite the firepower that you have, do not go in an equal gunfight, do not go into a gunfight, especially with the PR7 Ustroini, the Z20 at range, and also, and out of them all, the light cruisers. Going back to the torpedoes for a moment, those are the stats for the stock torpedoes, and as you can see, they are fairly quick with 83 km per hour, making them some of the fastest in the game, but with a range of 5.5 kilometers. Now in close quarters, this is good enough, I'd say, but if you want to actually have some torpedoes that pose a threat quite literally for a longer time, I actually think it's better to have the slower ones with the torpedo mode. While their speed drops quite substantially, going down from 83 to 49 km per hour, they gain a whole lot of range, up to 13.7 kilometers. That is good enough to spawn them even into enemy cruiser spawns. And with 10 of them, you can actually make a quite dense, quite wide torpedo pattern, which might catch them off guard when they are tunnel visioning and just looking down the aiming sights. But also, if even they are spotted, forces the enemy to avoid them, and that leads the enemy to actually sail in a predictable line in a not so great way, which they actually don't want to, and so they then might succumb to gunfire easier. But the most important lesson with the torpedoes is that you get rid of them very soon, because they are actually covering quite a substantial amount of your superstructure and therefore easy to hit, and I lost my ship very often to a single hit to the torpedo launchers. So now, finally, let's talk about the tips and tricks and the tactics how to use the ship. So first of all, we have some armor, so that actually leads you into fighting enemy patrol boats and also fighting some of the wannabe destroyers, especially those with autocannons that only can use HE, where your armor might just not allow those shells to penetrate you, or if they penetrate you, drastically reduce the amount of damage. And furthermore, you are a nightmare for aircraft. So the combination of the massive amount of ammunition and the highest DPM actually leads you to stay back at first and let enemy ships such as light cruisers tank the damage while you dish it out, so you're more like the damage dealer. And also later in the game, when there are more and more aircraft in the air, you should focus on them with your proximity fuse, high explosive shells, but also with your 40mm you can protect an entire fleet if you know what you're doing, and shooting down aircraft is also very rewarding. Furthermore, you should avoid a direct gunfight, especially at range, not just only the light cruisers, but also especially the Germans, because their APHE really hurts, despite having a rather low bursting charge, but they might hit you repeatedly, and they can maybe dodge your shells more reliable than you can dodge theirs because of the difference in muzzle velocity. Also, your turrets are very, very fragile, even when you face PT boats, and this is one of the big counters to this ship. Just aim at the rather big turrets and then you can engage them further, or you can choose to disengage. Now let's have actually a look at a complete battle, and I will talk you through. So you saw quite some intense gameplay in the background, but now I actually want to focus on what to do, what not to do, how to play, and how to use the ammunition. So in quintessence, I use quite a lot of the semi-armor piercing. It's declared as APHE, but practically it is semi-armor piercing. And I think it deals a lot of damage if somebody is bow on, if you cannot really kill it with HE, and even against light cruisers you can then disable the guns and actually deal a lot of damage to the superstructure. Now the first thing that actually crosses my way is a light cruiser, and out of all the light cruisers this looks like the German KMS Emden. I don't want to have anything to do with that thing at close quarters, and I also want to get rid of my torpedoes. So here you can see how I use actually the torpedo indicator and ignore it. And so I use here with the green line on the horizon the indicator and just make a broad line of torpedoes, if you will. I see that B gets captured, and that actually triggers my interest, and there they are, 2 of them actually. So the first one turned away, the second one is behind the island. I actually correct my aim, and I use also the proximity fuse. Now that has been changed, the mechanics, since the very first time that I used the USS Fletcher, or the Fletcher class, the USS Cowell, and now you have to directly hit the ships. But that's fair enough, and let's aim at the second one. Bit more lead, come on, bit shorter, can we do it? Seems like he lives to fight another day, at least for the moment. Now I actually fire here at the destroyer, a bit the weird maneuvering. I try to keep the Emden and the big pack of the enemy destroyers behind the island. I focus here with AP on this guy, and as you can see, the accuracy on those guns is horrible. So another destroyer comes my way, and then obviously I try to select him. I aim very, very low. It looks like I'm shooting at the water, but RNG is with me, and I get an ammo rack detonation on the first one. Obviously I had to aim here for the frontal ammo rack. And as you can see, while I'm not shooting here precisely, the inaccuracy of the guns is severe, especially at long ranges, and it is nothing compared to the German Z20 or even the Haida in particular. Now, the second he gives a little bit broadside, I might switch here to the proximity fuse, or aka the HE, and I also let my 40mm fire here at ships, so I toggle my gunners, which is very important. I always toggle them that they shoot as well as aircraft, and I always prioritize aircraft here, but you can see the damage output here is not that impressive, up until the point that we hit actually the torpedo tubes, and this is why I fired my torpedo tubes early on. It happened way too often. Now we have the broadside of the Haida. I get shot from the side, and I think it's a PT boat, so I can ignore it. I need to deal with this threat. I need to reduce the amount of guns that he actually can use, and I try to actually go here for his ammo rack, but the very insanely working turtleback armor well, neglects me here the damage, but actually the HMS Enterprise gunned down the Emden, so that's a new one, and the gunners are already firing somewhere in the air, but there is actually a hydrofoil, that's the PGH2 if I'm not mistaken, and we just miss him, so we obviously correct our aim and try again. And there we go. So that's good. That's very good. Those hydrofoils are sometimes really difficult to hit, but regular ships are better. So you can see how good you are in dealing with enemy patrol boats. Again, it is very beneficial to have 4 guns in the front, and while your normal dispersion might troll you a little bit in a destroyer fight or fighting a cruiser, especially again, as I said multiple times, at long ranges, this might be considered actually an advantage versus patrol boats if they try to change their speed, if they try to throw you off target with maneuvering, then the 1 or 2 shells that go a bit odd or a bit wide might actually be beneficial for you. So I think now it's time to actually go into A and try to deal with the enemy there. Now there I can see a destroyer, and he is brought it onto me, so I use here in this case AP, and because it is actually again not a destroyer, it's a Emden. And then obviously this guy here comes, and yeah, as you can see, I toggled my gunners that they only fire at ships right now, and my 40mm, there you can see the hail of fire coming in. There is just no tomorrow for this guy. And then another ship comes in. I just see here the gray box, and I fire into it with the high explosive again. Notice that I try to avoid here the fight with the enemy destroyers, and that I try to give here my potential PT boat buddies an advantage. Now there is again another destroyer, looks like a German one if I'm not mistaken, and again we fire at it. But because I'm reversing, I actually need to give more lead, or I actually need to correct my aim with giving more lead. And there we actually hit the propulsion systems, which is good. Now I don't want to have, I want to deal with here base fuse AG or APCBC rounds. They are really nasty against you, because the base fuse doesn't really care about your pitiful armor. Then we get a nice ammo rack detonation, and the armor piercing just hits you very hard, and because you actually have armor, it gets triggered very reliable. So now I think to myself, we have cleared now so many of those destroyers. I need to watch out, and I had a feeling my spider senses were tingling. An aircraft is coming in, and there you can see how I actually single fire here, and there you can see this plane actually gets lit up by the flak shells quite efficiently. So this proximity fuse is worth its weight in gold, I'd say. And if I could aim for a bit, he actually dodged pretty well, but that's it for him. The question is, did he get off his torpedo? Doesn't look like it. Okay, because especially those American torpedoes and later on the Japanese torpedoes can get launched from pretty high altitude with a pretty decent speed. So again, in this case, the proximity fuse is king. And that in combination with your 40mm is just glorious. That looks like a BF-110. Let's fire into his direction with the proximity fuse, giving a good lead. Slow muzzle velocity. Come on, just firing over the horizon. There we go. So, and there you can see the 40mm that are just firing everywhere. So this is just crazy. This is slaughtering left, right, and center. And I think the most important thing is this ship might not be the brightest fighting star early game, but especially late game, when there are a lot of people going into their patrol boats trying to go for the middle cap or trying to get into aircraft for revenge bombing, then you are becoming more and more dangerous and much more viable for your team. So keep that in mind. Survive the beginning, stay alive, let your cruisers do the tanking, and later on protect your cruisers from aircraft attack, especially if you have an Emden on your team or a Krasny Kafkas. Protect them from aircraft attack. Their armor and their guns are also very important to win the fight. Again, your guns are not the most accurate ones, so there is actually a bit of a problem in fighting enemy destroyers. At close quarters, where your DPM comes into play and your accuracy isn't that important, or where you have less amounts of plunging fire, if you will, and the shells don't hang in the air for quite such a long time, there you actually can fairly reasonably fight all enemy destroyers, since also you have a very good turret rotation speed. So, yeah, this is now the last candidate. This aircraft just got shot down, and this is now the 13th kill, I guess. Quite a bit of plane shooting and also cruiser and destroyer and especially patrol boat shooting has been done. And now I'm in the middle. Now I want to make sure that we bring this game home, that we actually don't lose and no patrol boat will sneak around and capture the capture points under my nose. Despite getting a critical hit in, we are not getting the kill on this guy. But that's not really such a problem since we actually shot down a fair number of aircraft before and also dealt efficiently with the patrol boats. So that's it for this battle. There is the Survivor Award, and there you can see we did quite a lot of action. And let's have a quick look at the results. So for 4 aircraft kills, 9 kills and 5 assists and 1 capture zone, we got 61,000 silver lines and 6,533 research points. And we got also the Survivor Medal, as well as a good first place in the team. No, it was actually second place, but you know, we were very close to the top. That's it for me today, so thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Let me know how you like this review. Again, big thank you to Drachinifel for the 5-minute guide. Link to his YouTube channel is in the video description down below. So again, give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other in the skies, on the battlefields, and on the waves of War Thunder.